From a special forces soldier who did black operations and later hunted killers in Miami, to a man who shot teenagers in parked cars and mailed cryptic letters to newspapers, one man had an instinct so sharp he could smell a killer hiding behind a friendly smile. The other, nobody suspected a thing. In this video, we're comparing Sergeant James Doakes' elite military training and investigative instincts against the Zodiac Killer's random attacks and cipher games. First up, we got intelligence. Special Forces operative versus amateur code writer. Sergeant James Doakes operated with elite Special Forces training, the kind of background that teaches you how to find and neutralize dangerous people in hostile environments. Doakes enlisted in the United States Army and served in Special Forces-style black operations. After his military service, he transitioned into police work and joined Miami Metro Homicide. His black op work put him in contact with brutal people and situations overseas. The show makes clear that he's dealt with violent killers long before Miami. Doakes' intelligence was operational. His special force training meant understanding threat assessments, surveillance detection, pattern recognition, and psychological profiling. At Miami Metro, Doakes served as detective and supervisor, partnering with Angel Batista and Deborah Morgan while working with forensic specialists, including Dexter Morgan. One of his most defining traits is that he's the first one at Miami Metro to realize something is seriously wrong with Dexter. Doakes didn't need evidence or proof. He felt it in his gut from day one. While everyone else saw Dexter as the helpful, awkward lab geek, Doakes saw danger. He called Dexter creepy, weird, a freak, not because of anything Dexter did wrong, but because Doakes' instinct screamed that something was deeply wrong with this man. He explained to LaGuerta it was instinct and a hell of a lot of experience from his military service. Doakes' elite military training created an investigator whose instincts put him onto Dexter when nobody else at Miami Metro, not even the FBI, was looking in his direction. But before we move on, if you're enjoying this breakdown, make sure to hit that subscribe button. But what about a killer whose only intelligence came from mailing puzzles to newspapers? There's no confirmed evidence the Zodiac had military or police training, and he relied on creating coded messages that were more about theater than strategy. The Zodiac murdered 5 known victims in the San Francisco Bay Area between December 1968 and October 1969. He mailed taunting messages to newspapers, threatening killing sprees if they weren't printed. On August 1, 1969, 3 newspapers received letters containing 1/3 of a 508-symbol cryptogram. North Salina teachers Donald and Betty Hardin solved it within 1 week. The solution revealed the Zodiac lied, containing the words, "I will not give you my name." The second cipher, the Z340, remained unsolved for 51 years until December of 2020 when David Orenchak, Sam Blake, and Jarl Van Eyck cracked it. The 408 cipher was basic enough for civilians to crack, while the 340 was complex enough to stay unsolved for 51 years. His ciphers were more about theater than strategy. Compare this to Doakes, who tracked Dexter by planting a GPS tracker on his boat and predicting Dexter's next kill. But here's the critical difference. The Zodiac operated in San Francisco Bay Area for over a year, killing 5 people. Nobody at his job suspected him. No neighbor called police about weird behavior. No coworker felt that gut-level wrongness that Doakes felt about Dexter. The Zodiac blended into normal society perfectly, while Doakes could spot a predator from across the room. The Zodiac's cipher games demonstrated attempts at appearing intelligent through theatrics, but he never triggered anyone's instincts the way Dexter triggered Doakes. So the winner in this case is Doakes. Elite Special Forces training against someone who never had anyone with Doakes' instincts hunting him? The Zodiac ciphers couldn't compensate for having no confirmed evidence of professional training and nobody sensing his darkness. But intelligence only matters if your operational methods actually work, and that's where professional surveillance meet public street attacks. Sergeant Doakes followed disciplined investigative procedures combining Special Forces training with police methodology. Throughout Season 2, Doakes secretly watched Dexter despite LaGuerta telling him to stop. He planted a GPS tracker on Dexter's boat, the Slice of Life. Using GPS data, Doakes deduced the boat disposed bodies in the Gulf Stream. He analyzed patterns, predicted Dexter's next kill, and positioned himself to catch Dexter in the act. When Doakes caught Dexter disposing of body parts at Jimenez's cabin in the Everglades, it was because of weeks of professional surveillance. Doakes' method combined military surveillance with police investigation, but Doakes didn't start with evidence. He started with instinct. That feeling that something was wrong with Dexter drove him to plant that GPS tracker. His gut told him Dexter was dangerous, and his training gave him the tools to prove it. Doakes' instincts wouldn't let it go, even when facing death. Doakes' professional surveillance combined invisible tracking and strategic positioning to expose a serial killer nobody else expected. Now contrast that disciplined investigation with a man who just shot random people on public streets. The Zodiac attacked victims in semi-open areas that were isolated enough for him to strike, but risky enough to leave witnesses or survivors. On December 20th, 1968, Betty Lou Jensen, 16, and David Faraday, 17, were shot on Lake Herman Road in Benicia. Both died with no survivors. On July 4th, 1969, Darlene Ferrin, 22, and Michael Mageau, 19, were shot at Blue Rock Springs Park. Darlene died, and Michael survived and described the shooter. On September 27, 1969, Brian Hartnell, 20, and Cecilia Shepard, 22, were picnicking at Lake Berryessa when a man wearing a black executioner's hood approached with a gun. He tied them with pre-cut clothesline, then stabbed both repeatedly. The attack happened in late afternoon with enough daylight for survivors to describe the hood, clothing, and voice. Cecilia died 2 days later. Brian survived. On October 11, 1969, cab driver Paul Stein, 29, was shot in the head in Presidio Heights. 3 teenagers witnessed the crime from across the street. His attacks took place in lovers' lanes, lakefronts, or quiet residential streets. Most attacks had survivors who described him, except the first attack where both victims died. Survivor descriptions overlapped enough to form a general profile. But here's what matters. The Zodiac had no one with Doakes' instincts tracking him. No detective felt that wrongness when they interviewed witnesses. The Zodiac never triggered anyone's danger sensors the way Dexter triggered Doakes from day one. The Zodiac's method created witnesses and physical evidence at most crime scenes, while maximizing fear. But nobody hunting him had that gut-level recognition. So the winner in this case is Doakes. Professional surveillance with GPS tracking against attacks that left witnesses and survivors. The Zodiac's method guaranteed evidence, but none of those witnesses had Doakes' instinct to recognize a predator. What do you think of Doakes' investigative skills versus the Zodiac's chaotic methods? Drop a comment down below. But even perfect surveillance means nothing if you're targeting the wrong people, and that's where strategic investigation confronts random victim selection. Sergeant Doakes selected his investigation target based on behavioral analysis and gut instinct, indicating Dexter was hiding something dangerous. From the beginning, Doakes viewed Dexter as creepy and weird, continuously calling him a freak. Doakes explained to LaGuerta his suspicions stemmed from instinct and a hell of a lot of experience, from fighting brutal enemies in the military. When Doakes fought back during a confrontation, Doakes said, "Lab geek my ass," confirming his suspicions. Doakes' selection was about identifying a predator hiding in plain sight, but the observation came second. The instinct came first. From the very beginning, Doakes sensed predatory behavior in Dexter that nobody else detected. His Special Forces background trained him to recognize killers, and that recognition was instant and visceral. He didn't logically deduce Dexter was dangerous. He felt it. When Doakes caught Dexter at Jimenez's cabin, he was proven correct. Doakes' strategic target selection identified a serial killer through gut instinct, when professional investigators saw nothing suspicious. But what happens when your victim selection creates obvious patterns? The Zodiac attacked random young couples in a pattern that investigators recognized after the second attack, creating maximum public fear. David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen were shot on December 20th, 1968. Darlene Ferrin and Michael Mageau were shot on July 4th, 1969. Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were stabbed September 27th, 1969. Paul Stein was shot on October 11th, 1969. The Zodiac generally targeted young couples in parked cars in remote areas. Most attacks followed a pattern until he broke it by killing a cab driver. The pattern was obvious enough that young couples across the Bay Area changed their routines and stayed home instead of parking in remote areas. Investigators recognized patterns after the second attack, but each department handles cases separately, which slows things down. Zodiac struck in environments that maximized fear, creating chaos and headlines. But the Zodiac never triggered anyone's instinct like Doakes' instincts were triggered. He approached Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard at Lake Berryessa, and they assumed that he was just another person at the lake until he pulled out a gun. The teenagers who saw him kill Paul Stein thought that they were watching a robbery. Nobody's alarm bells went off. No one felt that wrongness that Doakes felt about Dexter. The Zodiac's random victim selection created recognizable patterns while generating public fear, but he never made anyone's instincts scream danger. So the winner in this case is Doakes. Strategic criminal investigation that identified a hidden serial killer through gut instinct against random victim selection. The Zodiac's approach guaranteed intense investigation, but nobody investigating had that preternatural sense that something was wrong. If you're enjoying this breakdown and want more long-form crime content, check out our compilation channel, Dexecutioner Longs, for extended deep dives. The link will be pinned in the top comment. But even perfect victim selection means nothing if basic mistakes expose your identity, and that's where professional discipline confronts operational incompetence. Sergeant Doakes maintained operational security through military-trained surveillance, techniques that remain invisible until circumstances force the confrontation. Throughout Season 2, Doakes tracked Dexter extensively without detection. He planted a GPS tracker on the slice of life and monitored movements for weeks. Dexter, who had spent years killing without being caught, is finally forced to deal with the one person who will not ignore his weirdness. The GPS placement was professional, surveillance was invisible, and investigation was methodical. Doakes' operational security reflected Special Force training. His investigation remained invisible to everyone at Miami Metro except La Huerta. The Zodiac's biggest operational advantage was nobody was looking for him specifically. No detective woke up thinking about him. Doakes, on the other hand, became Dexter's worst nightmare because his instincts wouldn't let him look away. That preternatural ability to sense danger meant Dexter had someone constantly watching, constantly suspicious, constantly investigating. Doakes' operational security combined invisible surveillance and strategic confrontation, all driven by instincts that wouldn't let him ignore Dexter. But what happens when your operational security consists of leaving fingerprints and witnesses at every crime scene? The Zodiac left enough evidence to study, but not enough to identify him, which is why the case remains unsolved. At Lake Herman Road, the Zodiac left 22 caliber shell casings and bullets. At Blue Rock Springs, he left 9mm bullets and a survivor. The Zodiac stayed on the line long enough for the operator to trace the call, but this wasn't modern GPS tracing. It relied on slow 1960s switching equipment. At Lake Berryessa, he attacked in late afternoon, leaving a survivor. A palm print was lifted from the payphone, but investigators were never able to confirm whether it belonged to the Zodiac or a random caller. At Paul Stine's murder, 3 teenagers witnessed the crime. Detectives lifted partial prints from the cab, widely believed to be the Zodiac's, but never 100% verified. The Zodiac mailed a bloody piece of Paul Stine's shirt to the Chronicle, proving that he was the killer. Zodiac left more evidence than a careful killer would, but not enough for absolute identification by 1960s forensic standards. He mailed letters and Paul Stine's shirt. Like many taunting killers, he wanted attention more than secrecy. 2 patrol officers passed a white male walking away from Paul Stine's murder scene. Due to dispatch confusion, the officers didn't stop the man who matched the corrected description. With today's technology, Zodiac would have been caught in days. In the late 1960s, sloppy crime scenes and miscommunication gave him room to slip away. The Zodiac left enough evidence to study, but not enough to identify him using 1960s forensic technology. And critically, nobody hunting him had instincts screaming that a specific person was the killer. So the winner in this case is Doakes. From a fictional versus real-world analysis, Doakes looks massively more disciplined than the Zodiac, who operated with a mix of planning and sloppiness. The real difference? Dexter had someone whose instincts wouldn't let him go. The Zodiac never triggered that response in anyone. This comparison ultimately comes down to one critical difference: instinct. Sergeant James Doakes possessed something that couldn't be taught in Special Forces training or learned from years of police work. He could sense killers. That gut-level recognition of predatory behavior meant Dexter never had a moment of peace at Miami Metro. From day one, Doakes knew something was wrong. He couldn't prove it initially, but he felt it, and that feeling drove everything else. The surveillance, the GPS tracking, the obsessive investigation. The Zodiac Killer had no Doakes, had nobody that sensed his darkness, nobody that felt wrongness. He could walk down the street, go to work, live his normal life, and nobody's instincts screamed danger when they looked at him. That's why the case remains unsolved 50 years later. Between 1968 and 1969, he killed 5 people and wounded 2 others. Based on evidence available, there's no confirmed proof that he had professional training in investigation or covert operations. Doakes' Special Forces background gave him skills, but his instinct gave him direction. He knew who to investigate because he could feel Dexter's predatory nature. He put himself onto Dexter when nobody else at Miami Metro, not even the FBI, was looking in his direction. His investigation combined GPS tracking, pattern analysis, and strategic positioning to catch Dexter disposing of body parts. The Zodiac cipher games were clever enough to get attention, but not meaningful enough to reveal his identity. His 408-character cipher was basic enough for 2 school teachers to crack in 1 week. His 340-character cipher was complex enough to stay unsolved for 51 years. But those ciphers didn't matter because nobody was obsessively focused on him the way that Doakes was obsessively focused on Dexter. Doakes' investigation method combined military surveillance with police procedures, all driven by instinct that wouldn't let him look away. He planted GPS trackers, analyzed patterns, predicted targets, positioned himself to catch his subject. His surveillance remained invisible until he chose to act on it. The Zodiac bounced between smart planning and reckless improvisation. His attacks took place in lovers' lanes, lakefronts, or quiet residential streets. Most attacks left witnesses, survivors, or both, but those leads didn't point to a specific person because nobody felt that instinctive recognition. Doakes' target selection identified a predator hiding in plain sight through pure instinct. His gut told him that Dexter was dangerous before his training confirmed it. He recognized Dexter's darkness when everyone else saw a friendly forensics analyst. Most Zodiac attacks followed a pattern, young couples in isolated areas, until he broke it by killing a cab driver. This pattern allowed investigators to connect cases, but patterns don't catch killers. People catch killers, and nobody hunting the Zodiac had Doakes' instincts. Doakes' operational security reflected professional discipline. His surveillance was invisible, his investigation was private, his confrontation was strategic, all of it driven by instincts that wouldn't quit. Zodiac left more evidence than a careful killer would, but not enough for absolute identification by 1960 standards. Those fingerprints are still debated. He mailed physical evidence that confirmed his involvement, but gave analysts nothing concrete enough to identify him. And critically, nobody investigating felt that gut level of certainty about a specific suspect. From a storytelling perspective, this comparison reveals the gap between having someone who can sense your darkness versus operating without triggering anyone's alarm bells. Doakes represents what happens when elite military training combines with killer instincts that can detect predators hiding in plain sight. The Zodiac represents what happens when someone operates without anyone sensing danger. One man had someone whose instincts wouldn't let him go, whose guts screamed danger from day one, whose training gave him the tools to act on those instincts. The other never triggered that response in anyone, and that gap shows why having someone who could sense your darkness is more dangerous than any forensic evidence. While operating without anyone's instincts alarming meant the Zodiac could vanish into history unsolved. If you enjoyed this breakdown, comparing professional military training to real-world chaos, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, and check out our previous video covering every time Walter White killed an innocent person.